You ready?
Good afternoon, y'all. Thank y'all so much for being here today. We're excited to have you join us for our annual halftime report. Before we get started, I do want to give a big thank you to all of our team members who volunteered to help make today happen. We truly couldn't do it without them. Also, a big shout out, I have a long list here, to the media team at KDP Productions, the AV guys from Gulf Coast Events, Smoking Jokers for those yummy pilaf bowls, the Cookies by Sweet Creations, and of course that good old Popcorn King popcorn. Now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Swan Capital founder and today's presenter, Andrew McMahon.
It was July 16th, 1945. In the middle of the New Mexico desert, the sun, or the second sun, lit up the second sky. That's what it looked like, because that morning, the world had changed forever. Behind the team of the Manhattan Project, they had done the impossible. No one thought that it was possible, but they did it. They split the atom, unleashing the power of the universe. But do you know how the scientists and mathematicians reacted that morning? They didn't cheer. They didn't even celebrate. They were silent. One whispered to another, "I've become death, the destroyer of worlds." Because they knew they created something that they couldn't fully control. They couldn't put back in the box. And today we're talking about something just as profound, not about splitting atoms, but about creating machines that can think for themselves. AI that designs, codes, governs decisions. And we're all racing to use it before we've even agreed on how to manage it. Investors are rolling in, the governments are watching, and over the next 5 years, it will determine what countries and what companies will lead and those that follow. This is a Manhattan moment, not because of fear, but because of power. The power that's luckily still in our hands, the power to prepare, plan, and manage our portfolios with a good stewardship. And this is all going to be pivotal in the next chapter to come, because I've found that wealth is not conserved or protected by those that cling to it. Wealth is conserved and protected by those who know what to do when the rules change. The atom gave us energy, but it also taught us a lot about responsibility. And if we've learned anything, it's that if we don't, AI will either serve us or subvert us based on how we at the helm and those controls decide to steward it. And so tonight, I don't want to talk about how we follow, but how we lead. I don't want to talk about the fear with future. I want to talk about how we fund it wisely. So welcome to the halftime report. If you haven't already, please pull out your phone and make sure that, of course, you've put it on mute and vibrate, but more importantly, if you'll pull out your camera and make sure that with your QR code there, you have inputted any questions that you have about the economy, portfolios, because I hope to answer that in this presentation. But just in case I don't, these questions will be anonymously presented to Lucas, who will curate those questions. And we hope to answer that in the question and answer time at the end. Now, if, for example, you have questions that are not for the public format, remember that this is a public event. And so to cover my tail feathers, this is not personal financial advice to you. This is not where you should run out and make specific decisions immediately based on what you're hearing today. But hopefully you're writing down these questions so that in a one-on-one phone call, email, a progress review with me or another advisor here can sit down with you and make sure that this advice gets synergistically harmonized with your financial plan. So tonight, today still, is our halftime report. And this is a fireside chat we do every 6 months. And I look forward to it, of unpacking where the market has been for the last 6 months, maybe where it's headed for the next 6 months, what economic markers that we're tracking, and then also what the approaches we're taking to help you and your families sleep well at night. And so we're going to break it down in 4 different categories. Number 1, where we are at presently. 2, what's behind all of this market behavior, what's driving it. 3, where is the market potentially headed? And then lastly, as you can see, what approaches we're using. So let's jump right in. We're really giddy about where we are presently, with 3 consecutive years of economic growth since a pullback in 2022. And it's really great to see these returns. But anytime we have those 3 years consecutive returns, we have to say, what got us here in the last 6 months? Well, as we saw in January 20th, the inauguration of the 47th president, second term, non-consecutive Donald Trump, and J.D. Vance, the 50th vice president of the United States, sworn in. And then you can see very quickly in February 1st, we had the tariffs that were levied upon Canada and Mexico, who said and talked a big game about retaliation. And then you had China that was levied a 10% tariff that argued that it would discuss it at the World Trade Organization. And then you saw April, we have Liberation Day, and then the market didn't take to that very kindly. But that 10% tariff, or basically like a VAT tax that Europe does to us when we go on our European cruises, we put that on the rest of the world to try to make sure these trade imbalances were fair. And then you can see the resurgence after the 90-day pause was put on those tariffs as they worked out any deals. And then the market kept on escalating and going higher and higher. And then the Middle East, which is still in the middle of a Gaza and border regional spillovers from that scenario over there. You have Israel and Iran that are starting to throw bombs and drone attacks at one another on key places. So Israel, you see that they attacked key military bases. And then you have what happens later on in June, where Trump calls for a unconditional surrender and then decides to send out B-2 Spirit bombers that drop on nuclear facilities like Nance, Fordow, and Isfahan. And then the market, just resilient as ever, shrugs it all off. And here we all are, where the market is up 6% year to date. And that is how resilient a market can be in a 6-month period. Now, amidst all of this U.S. volatility, we need to zoom in and look at the Magnificent Seven. And I want to start with the companies that have really struggled this year. So if you look at Tesla, really suffered because some of the non-Republican consumers and those abroad didn't take too kindly him buddying up to the administration. You have Apple, who sadly has really lagged and not had really good rollouts with AI, which is causing analysts a lot of concern. And again, Steve Jobs to roll over in his grave for another miss that Apple has seen. And then you see Google that's invested literally billions of dollars into AI, yet it's actually draining on revenues because even though they've invested, their search usage has been cannibalized by ChatGPT as people can change their consumer behavior to actually use chat to ask a question. And so you've seen this drawdown on free cash flows for Google. And so you can see that when we have such concentration into this 7 companies, and I talked about this at the State of the Market, that 38% of the S&P 500's growth was allocated to just 7 companies. And we hadn't seen anything like this yet close till since, 2000, where 28% of the S&P's returns in the 2000 dot-com crash was consolidated to 10. So we're more consolidated than ever. Then we take our focus to where we are at in the bull market. So I really like this slide. It actually shows you the tenure of bull markets and bear markets. You can see the length and months on the x-axis, and you can see the cumulative return on the y-axis. And what I want to take away from this is that we're 3 years since 2022 but the average bull market can last 5 to 6 years. Now that's the average. It doesn't mean there's no textbook, no rule book that says it has to go 5 to 6 years, but that's on average what it's done. The other thing I want to highlight is how comforting is how the strength and the length of bull markets are compared to bear markets, to give us all perspective how long they can go. So very helpful graph since again, for pretty far way back, since 1970, that graph goes. If we zoom even deeper to the different sectors that make up our economy, this growth has not all been equal. There are industrial sector, you can see the communications, utility sectors, financial sector has had over 8% return in the last 6 months. But then you see those who have suffered, which is at the very bottom. You've seen energy, healthcare, discretionary really suffer. But I don't want you to miss the drawdown in between a year. That means that technology, for example, had a 26% loss this year. So when I meet with a new family that has 30 or 40% of their money in just tech stocks or just financial stocks, that is a risky game to play, because you want to have sector optimization among all of these sectors. And it can just tell you, if you had 40% of this in tech, how quickly the game can change with a 26% drop in just 6 months. Now, we're here back again at an overvalued market. By almost every metric that we track and look at, the market is overvalued. One of the ones that we use on a regular basis is price to earnings ratio adjusted for inflation, named after Professor Shiller. This shows you that right now we are 2 times the average being 17%, we're at current levels of 38. What that translates in layman's terms is we're buying 38 times of earnings for $1 of earnings. So for every dollar, we're paying $38. Imagine having a business that makes $1, yet you're paying $38, what would take 38 years to potentially receive back your money. And so the last time we've seen it that high was called the dot-com crash. It's about the only other time in history we've been this high. Not the Great Depression, not 2008, not the 1970s, even right there at COVID. So this is where we're treading very lightly, because the market could continue to go up. Most people interpret this data incorrectly, saying, well, the market could have a pullback. Not necessarily. Like I just shared, it could go on for another 2 or 3 years. The other thing we're taking, of course, a close look at, especially if you have grandchildren or children, is the housing market. Most people are not landlocked, they're interest rate locked. They can't move even if they wanted to, because they would actually have to buy a smaller home with current interest rates. And so we're starting to see, though, supply is increasing, but those who want to purchase maybe don't have enough down payment or can afford that monthly payment at that interest rate level. So if we see any drop in interest rates, which everyone is on bated breath to see what the Fed will eventually do, we hope to see some revitalization in the housing market. Now, if we turn our focus to what is all behind this market behavior, so we know where we are presently with the market being up 6%, but what's behind it all? Well, let's look under the hood. If we look at the pistons in the economic engine, this is the January 2025 snapshot in time. And so what you can see here is we had a lot of green on the board. There was a lot of things that were going well, but there was 2 items of concern, and that was geopolitical tensions. We had already in the playbook that we knew that there would be some trade discussions, and we hope to smooth those out behind closed doors maybe. And then we also knew that there were some geopolitical issues over in Europe. And so we had a lot of things going well for us, like corporate profit growth. We had, again, low unemployment. All of those, again, are pushing the market forward. But we did highlight that there were 2 red things that we had to keep a close eye on. Little did we know how big of a deal it would play out over the next 6 months. But here we are, 6 months once again, but the board looks completely different. The dashboard readings look very different. We still have some of the same issues. We have equity market valuation. We have geopolitical risk that hasn't been fleshed out. Again, always hopeful that some of that will be fixed sooner than later, but we have a lot more issues that weren't there before. Now, the good news is we have lower taxes extended for 5 years, so back to fiscal policy, and we still have credit demand and availability still as a green light. So again, there are some reasons to have some pause because we have these economic indicators that are not yet flashing red, but they're definitely flashing yellow. So as we continue, we need to zoom into one of those dashboard indicators, which is unemployment. And of course, this is a big driver of the economy. And what you're seeing here is non-supervisory production workers' wage growth as well as unemployment. And as you can see, historically, these have gone in inverse relationship from one another, but not this time. In this time, they're actually working in tandem together because what you've seen is unemployment has stabilized. It hit a low of 2023 and then has stabilized. You see wage growth doing the same thing. And then in 2025, with potentially stricter immigration policies, which is becoming a worldwide phenomenon, not just a national phenomenon, so with stricter immigration policies, but slowing job growth, it could balance one another out. But you're seeing them in tandem with one another. And again, this is why the Fed is keeping a close eye on their dual mandate. They're looking at two things. They're looking at, is inflation in check? And number two, where is jobs growth and where are we on unemployment? And so both of those are good indicators that there's no reason by the Fed to actually lower interest rates, because right now unemployment is still very low. Now, if we zoom over to corporate and business growth, we've actually seen these profits since 2002 actually just continue to go up and up and up for corporations. And this is really frustrating as a consumer, I can tell you, because you can see prices are going up, but the profit margins of companies are getting wider and wider. And so that's the dual edge of capitalism. But this is what I would encourage you to teach your kids and your grandkids, is that, you know, it pays hourly to be as a consumer, it costs you to be a consumer. To be an employee, it pays you hourly, but to be a business owner is where you find the most reward. And so the takeaway is, by being an owner of stocks and real estate, you're an owner that is riding those inflationary pressures. And if you're not an owner and you're just a consumer, you're way bad off. But if you're an employee, that's okay. But being the owner is the best, because these companies are continuing to use technology and AI to not slow down their profits. They're going to continue to widen them over and over again. Now, if we take our focus onto productivity and how this is happening, is AI was seen often kind of at first maybe as a disruptor, but really it's going to become only an enabler. The greatest companies, when clients ask me, like, should we be investing in AI? If you're investing in great companies, you are investing in AI. Every company, if they want to survive and increase those profit margins, will be adopting AI in a big way. And you can see how different industries are utilizing AI. So again, you're going to continue seeing that play out. Just like in the early days of the internet boom, you saw how people had got it wrong. They thought it was going to be a bigger deal faster, but it slowly is adopted into every industry. Now, again, Trump is his usually unpredictable self, which is in some ways great, in some ways not. But you can see that some of the analysts actually picked a lot of these things spot on. They knew that there was going to be some more rumbles with federal Chairman Jerome Powell. We knew that potentially we'd have some more issues with other relationships like Elon Musk. And so you can see that some of these have played out, but some of these are still not taken care of. We don't have an answer on how global trade and restructuring are going to all play out. So some of these analysts had figured it out, but there's still a lot of unknowns in the market. Now, as we turn our gaze to tariffs, August 1 deadline has passed. There has been 60 countries that face significant tariffs, but we have had some good progress with the EU and Vietnam, and we're making almost a deal with China, which is great. We need that with our largest trade partner. And as someone that is building an office and renovating and ordering supplies from overseas, I would really like to see that happen. But you can see that these conversations are continuing to play out. There's a lot of still unknowns, but we hope that the market stays patient instead of turns to panic like it did in April. So where do we go from here? Well, let's talk about where the next 6 months could lead us. Now, this is a mainstay evergreen slide that we have at every State of the Market and Halftime Report. These are the greatest financial minds at the largest financial institutions in the world. And almost every single one of them revised. They thought that the market would end at 6,600, and now it's at 6,200. It just shows you that the greatest experts, what they know and what they don't know. Because as much as people think they know someone that's in the know, the reality is human emotion can change the market on a dime. And so this is something as a good reminder that, again, we all don't bat 1,000. But I, again, don't bat 1,000 either. So that's why I would encourage you to just tread lightly, because I think we're not out of the woods yet for 2025. And so that's my outlook. But again, I might be, if I put my number out there, I'd be like one of these guys or gals. So I won't do that. If you look at the budget, which is going to continue to be a conversation, because we're at a very interesting point where we have higher interest rates, but we're at the point where our national debt's interest payments, as you can see, are 16% of our spending. So let me put that in perspective. If your family has $100,000 of income, that 16% of your income is going to interest-only payments, and you just called the credit card company to raise the limit. That's a problem. And what's going to happen? I mean, it's a two-sided equation. You either have to spend less or you have to make more. How do they make more? They look back at you. And so this is a concern I have, is that we're at 122% currently, which is on par with where we were at after we blew up all of Europe, put back our enemies together so we avoided World War III. But this is where we're headed if we don't get our cost controls under control. So this is controversial, hate them or love them, but the reality is Elon Musk is probably the Edison of our time. And if he can't figure out government spending, we're in trouble. And so it's, to put it bluntly, I mean, this is the time where we have to start writing our senators and saying, hey, what are you doing about this situation? Because if you don't, it's going to continue to spiral out of control. And the budget goal was $2 trillion of savings. Then it was $1 trillion. And then this has been updated and revised since then. We're at $190 billion of savings. That's 2.6% of our federal spending. So that, to me, is kind of terrifying that we can't get it under control, this monumental expenditure of $7 trillion. So again, this is going to continue to be more and more of a conversation. The other thing, as someone that just went to Iceland and had to pay, what, $35, $38 for a hamburger, is reality. Be careful before you go to Iceland, you know, get a small loan. So when I went there, I saw that our dollar was not as strong. We've lost 11% of our buying power in the last 6 months overseas. And to me, that is pretty terrifying to lose that type of buying power. Now, currency is always a very volatile measurement, but it's something we are keeping a close eye on. And this is, again, why it's so important to have inflation beating assets, which is a good transition to not this slide, but the next one. So we are at a point where in business phases, every country is going through cycles. All markets are going through cycles, but countries do the same thing. Now we retrace cycles. Sometimes we go faster through different business cycles. But here's where, again, we are at in the business cycle. We're in a late cycle. That's why we've seen GDP slow down. Now, again, things can turn up the heat on that GDP, the gross domestic product. But if we're not careful, we could have, again, stimulus in China rebound and they go into an earlier mid-cycle of growth peaking. So again, something we're also keeping a close eye on. This is why it does, and it's important to make a note of, why we have international exposure in our portfolios. Even though international has not done as well over the last 10 years, but as of late has done really well. And that's why we always want to have some exposure there. Now, if we turn our look to this slide, which is showing money markets in this country, how people are flocking to money markets. And I want to always remind you that every investment has risk. How so? CDs, checking accounts, savings accounts, money markets have risk. The risk is inflation. And what you can see is this chart has influx and inflow of money going into money market. At what time did the money go into the market? January 2009. When was the great global financial crisis? In 2008. So what does this tell you? That most people are doing the backwards thing that they should do. That would have been the time not to put money in money markets, but put money in the market. So typically this has an inverse relationship to the market. So that's why, again, I said the bull market can last 5 to 6 years, and you're seeing people pile into money markets that are treading water with inflation. They're not designed to beat inflation. So it's important to have an emergency fund, but that's it. We need to start layering that back into inflation-beating assets. This is a very helpful chart, especially if we're not out of the woods in 2025. What this is showing to you is that in almost every year, there's about a 95% chance that we are going to have volatility in the market, that there's going to be a drawdown within the market in 1 year. This is really eye-opening that there's a 32% chance you're going to see a very large double-digit loss in the market in that year's time. But again, you've already seen, I showed you with the sectors, how the market could draw down and then rebound actually very nicely. And so this is why it's so important to make sure that you're invested in the market and not trying to time the market. It's all about time in the market, not market timing. This is also, I want to take a PSA to tell you, while the market is positive, and we are at 3 years while the market's positive, this is the time. If you have a big renovation, you have a big purchase coming up, you want to talk about your income changes that they need to increase, that you need to up how much you're taking on a monthly basis. When should you have that conversation? Now with me or one of the other financial planners, because this is the time we need to start making sure that we have any built up reserves, because there could be more volatility. When we put money in the market, it is a 3 to 5 year investment. A lot of clients look at their stock market investments as if it's liquid. It's not. It's a 3 year to 5 year commitment once the market takes a turn. So I want to share with you how proactive the portfolio team has been. With Lucas, our CFA, CFP at the helm, we're really proud of the pivots and changes that we've made with our Swan portfolios. Remember that our proprietary portfolios are done in-house. We're not paying a third-party money manager in St. Louis or in New York City to manage your money. We do that in-house, and we make all of the team. My wife, my money is invested alongside you in those Swan portfolios. And so we've done a lot of changes. You've probably seen a lot of changes in your statement. That's because we were selling some of the growth stocks, some of the technology stocks while they were up, and shifting to more value, because we feel like with the dividend yield and value being so undervalued along with international, it made sense to do a slight pivot. And so we've made those changes in the first quarter and second quarter. The next thing we've done proactively is tactical upshifting. And I really love this chart because it shows you, again, when the writing is on the wall, that there's some action actively that we need to take. So when the market is having reaching new highs, these represent downshifting, where we were shifting from one of our aggressive growth portfolios and shifting down to dividend or balance. And that made a lot of sense. While we hit new highs nearly what it felt like every day last year, what did we do in April? Well, we took the opposite approach. When the market was going down and down and down, we were upshifting and upshifting. And we were able to upshift nearly an entire gear through that period, which is fantastic. But now we find ourselves again at all-time highs, which makes us tread a little lightly, not necessarily in a rush to do any downshifting, but we are keeping a close eye on the markets. The next thing we've been doing is what we call dollar cost averaging, or DCAing. We've been taking money that was cash in clients' portfolios and putting that to work. We were taking out 10% from those wall accounts, those insulated from the market, those that zig when the market zags, and we've been moving that 10% into the market for times such as this, when the market starts getting choppy like it did in April. So we were able to dollar cost average through that period and use up millions of dollars of clients' cash that was earning interest, earning that 4%, but we were able to push that cash into the market at very good time periods. And so this is why we've seen some of our returns up year to date, 10 to 12%, while the market's up 6% because of these maneuvers. The next thing we worked on and will continue this year is with Roth conversions. I'm very excited that we have a 4-year extension of these tax rates that we've enjoyed for the last 4 years. We've been able to move $100 million plus to tax-free investments, and I hope to do $200 million in the next 4 to 5 years. With the One Big Beautiful Bill, it was able to lock in those rates till potentially the next administration or Congress decides to change it. So this is a really good chart to just show you during those intra-year declines. It's a good time to pick up the phone if you would like to discuss doing Roth conversions early when the market is choppy. You want to do Roth conversions when the market's down because you're paying taxes on a smaller amount. This is an eye-opening chart, and it's one for many grandchildren and children to heed. This shows someone that has invested, as you can see, $10,000 at the start of January. They had a very rocky start, then it dropped, but they held fast. And what happened? They've seen growth. Their money's now worth $10,620. But the other person that's trying to time the market, Joe at the water cooler, the Barracks lawyer, he thinks that you should actually get out while the market's down and maybe buy in at a lower time or another time. Well, that didn't work out for that nervous investor because they missed one day. They just waited the next day. They waited one day, and you can see that they'll probably never catch up to that calm investor. Now, the other avenue that we've been utilizing while hitting market all-time highs is introducing clients to our family of funds. So these are our private funds that our portfolio team and Lucas and I have built to have, again, a different reaction to the market. Remember that markets are cyclical. So is the stock market. So are energy prices and interest rates. And we want to have exposure to those different cycles. And so with Signet, we have our new vintage of Signet 2025, as well as Swan Nest that we rolled out this year. And so those are available to accredited investors, those that have $1 million net worth excluding their own home, or qualified clients with $2.2 million or more. Now, if we zoom into Signet, this is one of the properties, for example, that we purchased in the Signet 2024 fund. And so with this 2024 property, we were able to purchase this with 94% occupancy. It's got 702 units, and we're going to continue to, again, ride that wave of, again, rate increases that we'll see in that storage unit. And as those occupancies increase, ideally up to 98, 99%, we can see that growth that when we exit in 3, 4, or 5 years, we can see some great returns that, again, have nothing to do with the stock market. So now I do want to make note of this. With Signet, there are vintages, meaning that they're just a snapshot of time, of that year in time. 2023 might be better than 2025, but 2024 might be better than all of them. It's just depending on that snapshot of time. And then it also is those grapes or those properties that were put in, that we selected. So again, every vintage is different. And that's why we have many clients that have exposure to all three for that very reason, because then they have exposure to 70 properties. And not only they're geographically diversified, but they're different type diversified. So very excited about the $1.3 million of distributions of dividends. But then the rollout of Swan Nest made a lot of sense because right now we're tracking where energy demand is. We believe with drones, AI, and robotics, we're going to continue to need more and more energy. And so Signet is very light on the dividends. It's heavy on the appreciation. Nest is the complete opposite. We structured and engineered it to have high dividends. And this is tied to things like private credit, where you're the mortgage holder, where you're receiving interest payments for holding that debt. And then we have private lending, which is litigation finance and tax liens that have, again, nothing to do with the stock market. So already $10 million invested in Swan Nest and growing. A quick tax update from Rhonda is that with the One Big Beautiful Bill, we have those permanent tax rates for the foreseeable future, permanent quote unquote. We also have the standard deductions that you can see on the screen, but I also want to point out bonus depreciation. If you have rental properties, if you have exposure to Signet, this is amazing that 100% bonus depreciation was redone. That was on a fade out schedule, and now we have that. That's able to get that depreciation all in 1 year, which saves us money on our taxes in this year. You can see the electrical vehicles tax credits are ending September 30th, 2025. Mr. Malik is here. Mr. Malik, what do you want to say about estate planning updates?
Just that they finalized made permanent the tax exclusion. Most people, I mean, again, I don't presume to know anybody's estate, finances, but most of the time I don't run into the federal exclusion around here, 30 million.
It's a good problem to have, but that has been permanent, and now it's up with cost of living adjustments now.
Correct. And so I always tell people, you win the lottery, come in and see me if you need a different planning.
That's true.
But like I said, most of the time we don't have to talk about the federal exclusion here. We do have those permanent exclusion, the inflationary index estate gift tax exemptions as well. And so, like I said, make sure that we are paying attention to what our estate plan says and our tax brackets so that we know exactly what we're doing with regards to our estate.
Yeah, you want to see a 3 to 5 year window of time to lapse unless there's a life event to look over your legal documents with Scott or your family and make sure it matches your wishes. Again, if your home is titled solely or jointly in your name, again, talk with Scott about a life estate, an enhanced life estate, or a trust so that property does not go through probate. We've seen a lot of confusion about that. People think that I have to have my mortgage paid for in Florida to do that, and you do not.
Helping my brother-in-law because his mother thought she had it all done and she passed away and it wasn't. And so, just make sure that it's worth the time and effort to make sure all your T's are crossed, your I's are dotted.
It's always a great exercise. If you have banks, multiple credit unions that you deal with, ensure, get a written copy that your beneficiaries have primary and contingents. Make sure that it has the language per stirpes if that applies to you, which is Latin for by the blood. You want it to go to your grandchildren, ensure that it does with that per stirpes language. Now, we have some new faces, really excited about the new SWAN team members. You'll see Michaela at the front. We have Will, another advisor that's come from a large investment brokerage. And it was just really a relief that, he told me that, when I was at that big, large financial institution that you would know about, he said, we didn't talk about private funds until that client. They were eligible after $1 million, but we didn't talk about it until they had 10 million. He said, what a shame. So Bobby over in service as well. So if you haven't already, pull out your phone. We'll talk about those questions. Lucas has curated some questions for us, but there is time for maybe some last